Okay, we're gonna go ahead and get started. People can funnel in as they show up. I also record this too, so if you miss it or have to leave early or something, I will send out the recording. Okay, so first plant, we got Acer floridanum. So another maple. This one a little different with the leaf venation. So it's very typical like Canada flag leaf, if that makes sense. You got the five lobes, and the big difference between this and Acer rubrum is the fact that there aren't any very like prominent serrations on the leaf. The lobes are mostly entire, as you can see. Still opposites, like Acer rubrum. Everything in Acer ACE will be opposite, which is super nice, super helpful. And then is there a picture of the bark? Yeah, cool. So you see, this is the like mature, super mature bark for Acer floridanum. When it's younger, it'll be nice, light gray, smooth, like Acer rubrum. A lot of times it'll be multi-stemmed. This is more of a bottomland species, so it'll have like multiple branching stems in the understory. Will stay like pretty small. And then the samaras, fruit types of samara, you can see right here, about the size of a quarter. They're born in pairs like that, which is nice. And then I think these, yeah, mature in the fall, as opposed to Acer rubrum, which matures in the spring. So if you see samaras on a tree, that is a maple. That's a good indicator in the fall. Any questions on this one? It's pretty simple maple. The leaf is fairly different from Acer rubrum. If you remember, sometimes you'll get like 3 lobes for Acer rubrum. This one always 5, always entire with the sort of irregular pointed lobes. It's a very uniform leaf as opposed to Acer rubrum.
What does it feel like?
It's very glabrous. There's no pubescence or anything on it. It's maybe a little thicker than Acer rubrum, but not. It's not very thick like Simplocus or anything like that. Yeah. Palmate venation too, typical of the maples. Okay, everybody cool with that one? Cool. Okay. So next one, Alnaceriolata. This is smooth alder. So this is one of our first like wetland species. So you'll get some different sort of form with this. So this is in Betulaceae. So opposite, or not opposite, geez, alternate simple leaf. We should have, yeah, there we go. Cool. So simple leaf, and then cool thing about Betulaceae is they're always going to be doubly serrate. It's sort of hard to tell on this one because the serrations are pretty small. But so that means you'll have larger serrations and then smaller serrations on top of those, if that makes sense. So yeah, simple alternate leaf, broadly elliptical, and then sometimes it can get a little wider. As you can see in this picture, you got like an elliptical leaf, towards the terminal part of the twig, and then further back, you have these more ovate leaves. And then another cool thing about Alnus serialata is it has this small little brown bud that is stalked. So typically you'll have a bud that is pressed directly onto the twig, but with this one, it has a little woody stalk that brings it out off of the twig. And that makes it look sort of like a matchstick. And then your fruit types for this one. So it produces these catkins, and these little nutlets, or the nutlets are in the catkins. So nutlet or samara is an acceptable answer for the fruit type. And then the little nutlets themselves look like tiny little pine cones, essentially, and they will persist on the branch after they've dispersed the little samaras. So that's a good indicator if you don't have leaves. If you see these little nutlets, then you can tell that it is on the serialata. And then moving back to the form, so you can see the picture on the right is sort of the habitat that it enjoys. It'll always be like fairly close to a body of water. The one that we are gonna see at Lake Johnson was directly on the water. Like if the water level's high, it's gonna be completely submerged. But it'll never be a single stem tree. It'll always have sort of this scraggly, shrubby growth form where there's a bunch of stems coming off the ground. And then the bark will be smooth and gray. It often has these little patches of lichen on it. And if you've seen musclewood before, it's hard to describe. But on the serialata has bark sort of like musclewood, where it looks muscly, like there's these irregular ridges going on the bark that makes it look like an arm muscle almost. But the key thing to distinguish between this and musclewood when we learn musclewood is that musclewood will be a single stem tree. It'll never have these like multiple branches, whereas on the serialata will have multiple branches. Any questions on this one?
Can
Cool.
you do texture again?
Texture for the leaf.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's it's sometimes finely hairy, particularly on the leaf underside. It's a bit thicker of a leaf than some of the other ones, but yeah, mostly glabrous, but there's a little bit of hair on the leaf underside. And then you have like an acute base and an acute tip, and then you got the double serrations for Alnus. And the leaves are very pinnately veined. You can see in this picture, it's like very distinguished angles coming off of the mid vein. Cool. Is everybody good with that one? I think these teaching slides might be old. I don't think we're learning Rubenia. Yeah. Yeah, no Rubenia. Okay, moving on. Okay, so Corliss, another Betulaceae, um, another multi-stem one. Also sort of wetlands. Let's see, do we have the form? No. Okay. Well, the form is sort of in that middle picture. You can kind of see very like clonal, multi-stemmed shrub to small tree, it grows in these big clumps like this. And then the leaves, so this one versus like Ulna serrulata, in terms of Betulaceae plants, another simple alternate ovate leaf, but this one, it's going to have an acuminate tip. And as opposed to Ulmus, where it's sort of slightly hairy on the leaf underside, this one's very pubescent. And a cool way to figure that out is you can stick a hazelnut leaf on your shirt and it'll stay there, which is cool. It also has a chordate base. So you have the little hearts or butt-shaped base on the end, and then it's doubly serrate, as most things in Betulaceae are. And then this one has small stipules. There's not really a good picture of that, but it's just like essentially extra leaf tissue at the petiole. And then the fruit, you can see the two pictures on the right. It's just large. The fruit type, yeah, fruit type's a nut. Large nut with these bracts that cover it as protection as they're ripening. And then you have little catkins in the bottom left. You don't need to know those for ID purposes. You just have to know the fruit, but they persist sometimes. Everything in Betulaceae has catkins though, so that's not super helpful. But the big thing is the pubescent leaf with the acuminate tip, and it's doubly serrate, and then the form, multi-stemmed. It will never be a single stem tree. And then habitat, like bottomlands, you'll see this near bodies of water most of the time. Any questions on this one? Cool. Okay. So white ash or American ash, Fraxinus americana. This is another Oleaceae plant, so the olive family. So like Triananthus. This is also going to be opposites. Sorry. And it's going to be pinnately compound. So you're going to have big pinnate leaf, 7 to 9 leaflets. They're kind of variable, but typically they're going to be elliptical to ovate shape. The number of leaflets isn't super helpful for this, but 7 to 9, a pinnate compound leaf. Main thing is it's opposite, and the terminal bud sort of looks like a screwdriver. So you have, your opposite leaves and then this screwdriver bud at the terminal parts to the end of the twig. Oh. Leaf array, yes. Yeah, that's a big thing. So if you have a compound leaf that's opposite, you'll know that it's not in the Carya genus. I think ashes are the only ones we know that are opposite in compounds, at least so far. But yeah, opposite compound leaf. That is, yeah. That'll get you to ash. And then the Samaras for ashes are pretty important. For this one, the seed is very stout, so it's like raised up above the wing tissue. And then the wing tissue covers the seed. We'll learn green ash, and the wing tissue won't cover the seed. It'll be very sparse. So that'll make more sense when we look over green ash. But this is white ash and American ash. Leaf margin, it'll have a few teeth on the leaflets. Sort of wavy. They're not very sharp serrations. They're more blunted. Yeah. Okay, there we go. And then the bark. So the bark can be variable, but there's two sort of distinct forms, as you can see in the picture. The left one looks a lot like carya, right? Like the DNA sort of XY interlacing ridges. But a lot of times they'll be shorter than carya and a lot more raised. So there's deeper furrows on the bark than like Carya tomentosa, Carya glabra, where you have that distinct pattern, but it's very pressed to the bark, if that makes sense. And then the bark form on the right, super cool. It's very blocky and like corkboard textured. So like if you press your thumb into it or like a fingernail, it'll feel sort of spongy, if that makes sense. And it has that nice like tan color. Very cool. It still has the interlacing like DNA pattern. Cool. Any questions on Fraxinus americana?
Do you have a picture of the Samara?
There's one right here on the right. Can you see that
Oh, I
one?
couldn't see it. Sorry. Yeah, now I see it.
Cool. Yeah. Yeah, so it has the wing texture going all the way down to the seed. We'll learn another ash that doesn't have that. It'll be very pointed with like super sparse wing texture. This one sort of just looks like a maple samara if it didn't have that like long hook pattern on the wing, if that makes sense. And maple samaras typically are born in those like double, like two on each side of the peduncle, whereas samaras for ashes will always be just one singular samara. Cool. Okay, next one. Leucothoe fontanesiana. Very fun scientific name. Mountain dog hobble, switch ivy, or drooping Leucothoe. This is another heath family Ericaceae plant. So your fruit type is going to be a capsule. You can see in the bottom right, it has that urn-shaped flower that will mature into a capsule, just like sourwood. So for ID, alternate simple leaf. It's very lanceolate shaped, so it's very pointed at the end. Again, a cute tip, sort of rounded base, and then it is the common name dog hobble comes from the super rough serrate margin. So if you were seeing this plant in person, you can run your thumb along the leaf margin against the grain going up towards the base, and it's very sharp. And the leaf's also evergreen, so you'll have leaves in the winter, and that means it'll be super leathery, very thick cuticle, so very hardy leaf. And then the growth form for this, the specific epithet Fontanasia comes from its fountain form. So you can see in that second picture where it sort of arches and then droops down at the end. This would be another one of those like clonal small understory plants. You typically see it with green stems. It doesn't get too much bigger than what it is in the second picture, but it'll be super clonal, like dense patches. And then you can see in the third picture, like far on the right, you got this zigzag stem or the twig, which is helpful as well. Any questions on this one? It's pretty distinct, the leaf, especially the evergreen leaf with this like very serrate margin. Oh, and it's also another like wetland species. Not particularly wetlands, but it's restricted to moist areas. You see it a lot in the mountains. Oh, yeah, it's evergreen. Yeah, so the leaves will persist throughout winter. So you have this like thick, leathery leaf at all times. Okay, moving along. Very distinct one, very fun. Okay, Liriodendron tulipifera, Vara tulipifera now, strangely. Yellow poplar, tulip poplar, or tulip tree. Tulipifera, meaning bearing tulips. You can see in the picture the flower. Sort of looks like a tulip flower, but don't let that confuse you. It's neither a tulip or a poplar. Unfortunate common name. This is in the magnolia family. And its leaves are going to be alternate, simple, and they have this nice distinct cat face. They're very uniform, so they'll always have these four lobes in this sort of cat face shape, if that makes sense. And then they'll have stipules present. You can see in this second picture, so more leaf tissue at the node where the base of the petiole is, in sort of covering where the leaf is growing out. So you'll see those more towards the end of the branch because they're used as a protective covering to help the leaf develop. And then you'll see encircling stipular scars on this. There's not a very good picture. But once those stipules dehisce or come off of the stem, they'll leave this circular scar that goes around the twig. So you'll see at like the terminal part of a twig of anything in the magnolia family, you'll see these small little lines circling the twig. And those are the stipular scars. Also, leaves are entire, glabrous, not super thick. And then the bark, you probably noticed walking around Lake Johnson, there's quite a few of these, and they have this really straight upright growth form. And then they have these nice vertical furrows that are flat, going straight up the stem, sort of parallel with the way the stem is growing. They're very light gray to whitish. Sometimes the furrows are a little wider than the rest of the tree. And then on the mature bits, so towards the bottom of the trunk, you'll get this sort of N shape that kind of looks like the way hickory grows sometimes, but that won't persist up the tree. It'll become more uniform and vertical. And then the fruit type, interesting, aggregate of samaras. So you can see in the picture, there's the fruit. You see the individual bits are the samaras, and then that's sort of middle parts is the thing that's holding it, making it an aggregate. So there's multiple samaras pressed around this like woody peg bit, if that makes sense. And then something that this doesn't mention, so everything in the Magnolia family will have a bud that is a valvate bud. So the terminal bud will have these sort of like clasping, like two clasping parts, as opposed to like maple buds we've seen where there's multiple scales on the terminal bud. This one's just two of them. It sort of looks like a snake head almost. And it's quite large. Any questions for tulip poplar?
So the second picture from the left, that's the stipules.
Yeah, those are the stipules. So it's just extra leaf tissue that occurs at the leaf node, and it's just like a protective covering as the leaf develops. Cool.
Elijah, could you describe the terminal bud again?
Oh yeah. I can probably get a picture of it too. Oh wait, actually, I think there's a good picture on this next slide. No, there's not. Oh, wait, there is. Okay, so the bottom left here. So this is the next plant. But the buds are essentially the same because they're both in the Magnolia family. So you see the top parts of that bud is like clasping over, and then there's like a second part, and they're sort of like cupped together, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
Okay,
thanks.
cool. Yeah. It's a lot more obvious in person. It's hard to like just look at the picture and like figure out what it looks like. But yeah, it's a valvate bud. So there's like two parts coming together. And then when the new growth forms, it like opens up. So yeah, cool. So this is the next plant, Magnolia tripetala. This is umbrella magnolia or umbrella tree. Tripetala meaning three-petaled, so that's just referring to the flowers, nothing to do with the leaves. Fruit types and aggregate of follicles, you can see that in the middle here. Yeah, it would have been really nice. We didn't get to those, unfortunately. They're not super big though, so they're not like the greatest umbrellas. But the leaves are like quite large. You can see them in the picture. Simple, alternate again. You can see that they almost look whorled, but if you were to take a stem and take a closer look, you would see that they're not coming off of the same sort of plane on the twig. They're alternate. They're coming off of different parts of the twig. Entire margin, it is very glabrous. It has an acute tip and then an acute base. You can see that in the picture with the bud. It's a small to medium understory tree. You won't see it get super large. The buds, very large, very fleshy and waxy. And then you can see the follicles as they're younger, more immature, they have this pinkish color. And then, well, that's the aggregate. And then the follicles are these little red seeds, and they'll fall out. And then typically what you're going to see, at least when getting quizzed with the fruits, is the far right picture where the follicles have already dehisced and come out, and you're just seeing the aggregate. So yeah, large, like sort of obovate leaf that's alternate, entire glabrous, and then the bark, typical magnolia bark, gonna be super smooth, light gray, and then have these sort of white splotches on it a lot of times. Yeah. Cool. Any questions for umbrella magnolia? It's a pretty pretty obvious one when you see it out in the field. That like almost world pattern of the leaves, which are alternate, sort of gives it away. Very large leaves. Cool. Okay, next one. Quercus rubra, northern red oak, as opposed to southern red oak, Quercus falcata, or just red oak. So another red oak. This one, its leaf is going to have these sort of more shallow sinuses as opposed to scarlet oak. It won't get super divided like that one, or like falcata. But just remember, falcata has that like bell-shaped base. This one's more obtuse of a base. It still has the bristle tips. The lobing for this one is pretty uniform. You'll get this like 7 to 9 lobes with the bristle tips on it, and then the sinuses between the lobes will be pretty shallow. A lot of times it can be very blobby, like black oak in the shade. But if you remember, black oak has that velvety leaf underside. This one will not. It'll be very glabrous. A lot of times people will like shake the leaf around, and if it sounds like a piece of paper, then that'll tell you it's Quercus rubra versus Quercus velutina. And then the bark is pretty distinct for Quercus rubra, as opposed to other red oaks. It'll have these really obvious ski trails going vertically up the stem, and they will go all the way down to the ground, as opposed to scarlet oak, Quercus coccinea, which will start like 15 feet up, if that makes sense. And then the nuts for Quercus rubra, it would be pretty large, a quite large of an acorn, and then they'll have a pretty small cap as opposed to the rest of the nut. You can see on the slide that says "Fat Man in a Beret," which is pretty descriptive of what the nut looks like. Very small cap, still has the like shingle patterns that you see with red oaks. They'll be pressed to the cap. It won't be like black oak where they're sort of fringy. It'll be like very pressed. And then the rest of the nut will be super large compared to the cap. Any questions for Quercus rubra? Cool. Okay. Okay, cool. Rhododendron maximum, another Ericaceae plant. Rhododendron, white rose bay, great rhododendron. Yeah, cool. Maximum meaning largest. I think that's just opposed to other rhododendrons. Fruit types of capsule. You can see that in the top right. And this is another Ericaceae plant that is evergreen. So you'll have these thick, leathery leaves that will persist through the winter. This one has a revolute margin sometimes. So that means the leaf margin will curl towards the underside of the leaf. And then it has sort of an acuneate, sort of acute base, and then an acute tip. So it's a very elliptical leaf, sort of narrow, long leaf. It has a very thick petiole and a thick leaf too. And then the form for it, very tall shrub. So multi-stemmed. It'll never have just one single stem. And then the bark will be this like reddish brown color with sort of like irregular scales going along the stem. And then the terminal bud, what will be this very large imbricate bud with small bracts surrounding it. You can see in that bottom picture, You have the bud, lots of scales on it, and then these little narrow linear things at the end are the bracts. Then you got the flowers. We won't see them. They've already flowered and matured into the capsules. Yeah. So yeah, another simple alternate Ericaceae plant. This one is evergreen. Another one where the leaves can sometimes look whorled because they cluster up to the end of the twig. But just remember to take a closer look. You'll see where the nodes are coming from and see that it's acute or alternate. Cool. Any questions for this one? It's a very mountain species. If you go further west, towards the Appalachians, you'll see it very commonly. It's a very dominant understory plant there. Okay, cool. Next one is Styrax. Styrax grandifolius, big leaf snowbell or big leaf storax. This is in Styracaceae, so its own family, the storax family. Grandifolius meaning large leaves. You can see in the picture. So you got simple alternate leaves, typically with an entire margin. They can sometimes have some serrations towards the tip of the leaf, and it has this very orbicular, obtuse shape with the obtuse base. And it is slightly pubescent, so a little bit of hair, mostly on the leaf underside. You can see in the top left, the bark, it'll be very dark gray. It can almost be black and smooth. It's a very small understory tree. We walked past a couple. They're sort of inconspicuous until you like walk up closer to them. But the bark is pretty distinct, that like dark, smooth bark. And the form is sort of scraggly. It'll be sort of zigzaggy. The stem arches over. It won't get very big. And then you have the fruit, the little light brown capsule, matures in the fall. So we'll see some fruits. But yeah, obovates, leaf, acute to acuminate tip, and then you have an obtuse base. Sometimes that base will be like very prominently angled. It'll be like a nice like 120-degree angle as it develops into the middle of the leaf.
How do you tell it apart from mulberry? Because it looks pretty similar.
Yeah, good question. So if you remember with Morris, rubra specifically, that one's going to be scabrous. So it'll have this super scabrous leaf. And then with Morris, just as the genus, it's going to have those really regular, like dentate serrations all the way around the leaf. And this one won't have that. A lot of times the leaf will be entire, and then sometimes you'll get sort of smaller serrations towards the tip, kind of like Nissa. But they'll be more smaller serrations rather than like the teeth that you get with Nissa, if that makes sense. And then the bark is very different from Morris. When Morris bark gets mature, it'll be like very flaky, very scaly bark. This one will always be smooth and dark. Cool. Okay, everybody good with that one? It'll be very small too. Even smaller than Morris. Morris can generally be like a small to medium-sized tree, but this one would be shrubby, small single stemmed tree, like less than 10 feet typically. Okay. So Swida, a momum, silky dogwood. So this isn't the dogwood that you typically see. This is a wetland obligate dogwood. So this is another multi-stemmed shrubby thing that likes to sit in the water. So it's in Cornaceae, so it's going to be opposite. Simple elliptical leaf, has entire margins, and then the venation is arcuate. So it'll be sort of like curving down towards the tip as opposed to pinnate margins, which are super linear, straight veins going to the sides. This one will curve down towards the tip. Often has wavy margins. You can see in that top left picture, sort of wavy. And then it has these reddish brown petioles, which is interesting. And then if you like bend the leaf a little bit and like crack the leaf tissue, you'll see like this bottom left picture, it'll have this like little thread running through the veins, which is interesting. That's all dogwoods. And then the twig and the bark, because it's this multi-stemmed little thing, will be like reddish brown, maroon color, and it'll have little hairs on it. Here's a good picture of the growth form. And then, yeah, bark is mostly smooth and gray when it's mature. And when it's immature, you can see as it goes up the stem, it'll have this nice like reddish tint. And then the fruits will be these little blue drupes. They'll be in big clusters, so there'll be a lot of them on here. You can see the little peduncles where a lot of drupes were. And then once we learn flowering dogwoods, it'll have red drupes. These are blue. Anything else? Leaf is glabrous. Not a lot of texture going on. Any questions on this one? It's another wetland obligate, so you'll see this one next to streams, next to lakes. And it won't have a single stem. It'll be multi-stemmed. Cool. Okay. So moving on to our hemlocks. We got a couple of them here. This is your more common one. This is Tsuga canadensis, eastern hemlock or Canada hemlock. It's in the pine family, it's Pinaceae, but as you can see, these needles aren't born in fascicles. They'll be just two ranked along the stem. And then underside of the needles will have two distinct lines that are the stomatal bands, where it's releasing water. Evergreen plant, again, like most things in Pinaceae. So those needles will persist through the winter. Habitat for this one is moist slopes, rocky areas, and narrow streams, primarily in the Appalachian Mountains. So it's more western in terms of North Carolina. There is Hemlock Bluffs, it's in Cary. That's the most eastern hemlock range I can think of. Branches are sort of drooping, so they'll come out and then droop down towards the ground. This one doesn't self-prune either. Oh, the stomatal bands, yeah. This isn't a great picture of it. Oh, you can see it better here. Yeah. So this bottom right bit, there's these two tiny little white lines along each needle. And so that is like bands of stomata. So where the leaf is retaining slash exuding water, that's where those are. They're on the underside. Yeah, they're simple, linear. Yep. Yeah, dark green. And then they have the stomatal bands. And they're two ranked, yeah. So they sort of look opposite. But if you remember Panacea, you don't really determine things in terms of alternate, opposite, or world. But yeah, two ranked along the stem. And then the cone is to top right, and then you can see the immature green cone there. Very small, as opposed to the pine cones we've learned. Sugar cones are quite small. So this is probably like the size of your fingertip. Little tiny egg-shaped cone. And the scales for this one are pointing down towards the terminal bit, or the umbo, I guess, of the cone. And then the bark for hemlocks, it has this like nice chocolate brown bark. And once it's mature, it'll develop these sort of flaky scales going up the stem. And then this left picture, you can see hemlock woolly adelgid. It's these sort of fuzzy white bits along the twig here. So that's the invasive adelgid beetle that causes population decline in hemlocks. Any questions for Suga canadensis? So this is the only hemlock you have to know by the plant. The other two hemlocks we'll learn, you only have to know the cone. Because this is the only one that grows here, at least. Okay, cool. Viburnum prunifolium. So another viburnum. This is blackthorn, nannyberry. So Vibernaceae again. So you're gonna have opposite leaf arrangements. Leaves are simple. They have these fine serrations along the margin, an acute base, acute tip. It's glabrous, and then, as you can guess, with prunifolium, they look very much like Prunus serratna leaves, so like black cherry. But this would be like a very small shrub to understory tree, so you won't get big like Prunus serratna, and they're also opposite. Fruit types that droop. It's here in the top right. It'll be black at maturity, and then forms in these tight clusters. And then the bark, it's smooth when it's young, and then it'll get platy as the tree matures. It'll sort of get cobbly or blocky, sort of like you see with black gum, where you have these nice circular blocks. It'll be like that, but much smaller. You can sort of see it in this bottom right picture. Yeah. So leaves looking a lot like black cherry, but they are opposite. And then small understory tree that will develop sort of cobbly, blocky bark. Any questions on this one? Big key thing is the opposite leaves and the fact that they look like Prunus serratna leaves.
Do you know if Prunus serratna or this one has thicker leaves or not?
I don't know if one is thicker than the other, but if you remember with Prunus serratna, a lot of times you will get that like orange pubescence on the leaf underside. Viburnum won't get that. This would be completely glabrous. And if you look inside the petiole at the vascular tissue of Prunus serotina, you'll see there's 3 little dots, sort of like persimmon with the smiley face. This won't have that either. It'll be uniform vascular tissue. And it'll be opposites. You know, Prunus serotina and persimmon are both alternate. Okay, cool. Another hemlock. So these are the ones you have to know just by the cone. So this is Tsuga caroliniana. This is a Carolina hemlock. Impanaceae again. It is restricted just to the southern Appalachians. It prefers like dry, rocky ridges, so higher elevations. If you remember Tsuga canadensis, that's going to be lower elevations on river sides, more like wetter sites. This one prefers drier sites. So you can imagine the form is going to be different. Tsuga canadensis will be a hardier tree, single stem. Well, they're both single stem, but it'll be much taller, ascending branch or drooping branches. And then Tsuga caroliniana will be very scraggly. You'll see a very smaller tree with a lot of zigzagging pattern on rocky ridges. There's a lot of it in the Limbal Gorge, if you're familiar. You don't have to know the leaves for this, but it's similar to Eastern hemlock, but this isn't too ranked. They'll sort of whirl around the twig. But the main thing you need to know for this one is the cone. And the cone is much larger than Eastern hemlock. It's not as large as any of our pine cones. But you can see it on the table here. It'll be pretty large, sort of egg-shaped cone. And then these scales are going to be very flat. And then once they get mature, you can see in this one on the right here, they'll reflect back towards the peduncle of the cone. Whereas with Tsuga canadensis, Eastern hemlock, those scales are going to be pointed directly down towards the tip. And this one, they'll be either 90 degrees or they'll be reflecting back towards the base. Any questions for this one? Again, you don't need to know the leaves. You just have to know the cone for this one. And of course, we'll tell you where it's from. So Western North Carolina, Rocky Ridges is where this one's restricted to. Okay.
I have a quick question about the lab sheets. Are we gonna get those if we come to lab or like the lab this week? Cause
Oh yeah, I think we're gonna print some more off. The ones from this lab are pretty soaked, so I don't think they're salvageable, but I think we're gonna print more. Yeah, and they're on the Moodle page, so you can have them online at the very least. But I think we're gonna print more of them. I will let you know once I find out.
all right, cool.
Yeah. Okay, moving on. So last hemlock, Tsuga heterophylla. So this is Western hemlock, so restricted to the west, specifically montane forests in the Pacific Northwest and northern Rocky Mountains. The cone is fairly small, like Tsuga canadensis, so Eastern hemlock, but the scales will be broader and they will reflect like Carolina hemlock. But keep in mind, these are much smaller than Carolina hemlock. It's a fairly simple one, especially since it's a Western species. That's a bit of a giveaway, but just for identification, smaller cone than Tsuga caroliniana, larger cone than Tsuga canadensis. And then this one's gonna have scales that are 90 degrees or reflexed, like caroliniana. It's a very cool species if you get to see it in person. Any questions on this one? I think that was the last species, yeah. So any questions on any of these that we learned? I know that was a bit quick. But there's not a lot of things to go off of when you're just looking at the pictures. So try to make sure to like get out, maybe back to Lake Johnson and try to see some of these in person. Yeah, there were only 15. Oh wait, no. Actually, there's one more. Yeah, because they had Robinia on the slide. Okay. So the other one's Ilex decidua, so it's a holly. It's not on the slide, but I will pull up a picture. So while I'm doing that, so it's Ilex decidua. It's in Aquifoliaceae, so the holly family. Oh, actually, I use. Yeah, okay. Okay, cool. Yeah. So Ilex decidua, deciduous holly. It's in the holly family, Aquifoliaceae. And then here is the leaf. So you have this acute margin and then sort of this blunted to roundish tip. The leaves are pretty variable, but the tip will always be like blunt, rounded shape, and then the base will always be this like narrow, acute base. It can sometimes have these sort of wavy, rounded serrations towards the tip, but the bottom half of the leaf back towards the base will always be entire. They're quite small, holly leaves, not very big, and they're deciduous. Most of our other hollies will be evergreen. Then the fruit type's a drupe. So you see them right here, these little red drupes, typical of your hollies. And then here's sort of the typical growth form. And this is not a great picture, but it's a small understory tree, single stemmed. And then the cool thing about it is it'll grow, the leaves will grow on short shoots, sort of like sweet gum does, where you have these like smaller twigs coming off of the main branch, and then you have clusters of leaves. It's another alternate simple species. And then the bark, super typical holly bark. It'll stay this like smooth, light gray color, and then oftentimes it'll be associated with a lot of lichen. So like right here, you see a lot of these white splotches with lichen on them. But yeah, pretty variable leaf, but it'll always be like blunted, mostly entire. Sometimes you'll have some serrations at the tip, and then an acute base. We'll see a few good examples at Swift Creek when we go there. So I'll make sure to point those out. And I think that's everything. Yeah. One of the common names is possum haw for this one, so pretty fun name. Possum haw or deciduous holly. Okay. Any questions for Ilex decidua or any of the other species? I'll send this video out to everyone later. And then we also have the teaching slides. I think Dr. Jeffries posted some review videos as well of all the species. So a lot of resources on Moodle. You got Ilex too. And I'll try to do a lot of review next lab, so you'll see some of these species in person. But yeah, I think that's everything. So cool. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thanks for coming.